A nervous silence hung over the grueling training ground, broken only by the sharp rhythmic commands of the Navy SEAL instructors. It was Hell Week, the brutal crucible where aspirations crumbled and legends were forged. A young recruit, his face pale with exhaustion, stumbled under the weight of his log. Laughter, cold and cruel, erupted from the rest of his boat crew. "Look at him," one recruit sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. "Can't even hold his own." Then their eyes fell on her, a petite woman no taller than 5'3", with a single unadorned tattoo on her wrist. It was a simple, yet elegant Celtic knot. As the men jeered at her, a burly recruit stepped forward, his eyes full of contempt. "What's that?" he scoffed, pointing at the tattoo. "Some kind of lucky charm for the week?" Her expression remained impassive, her gaze fixed on the horizon, but a silent fury burned in her eyes. The laughter continued, a chorus of ridicule that echoed in the cold morning air, but she did not flinch. She simply tightened her grip on the oar, her knuckles turning white, and pushed on. She had faced far worse than their mockery. She had walked through fire and emerged on the other side. This was nothing. Her name was Anya, and the tattoo on her wrist was more than just a piece of art. It was a scar, a memory, a testament to a life she had once known and a promise she had made. The Celtic knot was her brother's. He had gotten the same one on his 18th birthday, a symbol of their unbreakable bond. He was her hero, her protector, the one who had taught her how to stand tall, even when the world tried to knock her down. He was also the one who had died in her arms, a casualty of a war he never chose to fight. He was an aid worker, not a soldier, and he had been caught in the crossfire of a conflict he was trying to end. The night he died, he had smiled through the pain and told her, "Remember, Anya, the bravest battles are the ones fought in silence." Those words had become her mantra, the fuel that drove her every day. She had joined the Navy SEALs not out of a thirst for glory, but out of a desperate need to honor her brother's memory. She wanted to be a protector, a silent force for good in a world that had taken so much from her. She had endured the grueling training, the bone-crushing physical demands, and the soul-crushing emotional toll. She had pushed herself beyond her limits, not for a medal or a commendation, but for the ghost of a brother who had taught her the meaning of true courage. She had carried the weight of his memory and the burden of his loss, and she had done it all in silence. The tattoo on her wrist was a constant reminder of that promise, a symbol of her resolve. The taunts and jeers continued throughout the day. The recruits, fueled by their own insecurities and the grueling demands of Hell Week, saw her silence as weakness, her small frame as a liability. They made jokes about her size, about her lack of strength, about the mysterious tattoo that seemed to mock their own machismo. A few of them even tried to trip her during a log carry, a deliberate act of sabotage that could have gotten them all kicked out of the program. But Anya, with a quiet strength that belied her size, simply sidestepped their clumsy attempts and continued on, her gaze unwavering. Her silence was her shield, her dignity, her armor. She knew that true strength wasn't about shouting the loudest or proving a point with your fists. It was about enduring, about carrying on, even when everyone else was telling you to quit. The tension in the air was palpable, a thick blanket of animosity that grew heavier with every passing hour. The instructors, ever watchful, said nothing. They observed, their faces impassive, their silence amplifying the cruelty of the recruit's actions. They wanted to see how she would respond, whether she would break, whether her resolve would crumble under the pressure. But Anya, a living embodiment of quiet defiance, gave them nothing. She simply carried on, her movements precise, her focus unbreakable. As the sun began to set, casting long, mournful shadows across the training ground, the recruits were ordered to a final muster. They stood in formation, exhausted and filthy, their bodies aching, their spirits broken. The commanding officer, a legendary SEAL with a face as hard as stone and eyes that seemed to see right through you, stood before them. His presence alone was enough to silence the remaining whispers and snickers. He scanned the weary faces of the recruits, his gaze lingering on Anya for a moment longer than the others. He then addressed the recruits, his voice a low rumble. "You think you're tough? You think you've earned your place here?" You haven't even begun to understand what it means to be a SEAL. His words were a bucket of cold water dousing the last embers of their arrogance. You've shown me your strength, your endurance, but you have failed the most important test of all. The test of character. The recruits shifted nervously, their earlier bravado replaced with a creeping sense of dread. The commander's gaze landed on the burly recruit who had mocked Anya earlier. "You, son," he said, his voice as cold as ice. "What did you say to her today?" The recruit paled, his eyes darting to Anya, who stood perfectly still, her face a mask of serene calm. He stammered, unable to find the words. The commander didn't wait for an answer. He turned his attention to Anya, his expression softening just slightly. "Recruit," he said, his voice now a quiet command. "Show me your arm." Slowly, deliberately, she extended her wrist, revealing the simple, yet profound, Celtic knot. The commander's eyes widened, a flicker of recognition passing through them. He looked at the recruits, his gaze now filled with a quiet fury. "Do you know what this is?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "This is a symbol of a promise kept. This is the mark of a hero." He turned back to Anya, and in a move that stunned every person on the training ground, he snapped to attention and saluted her. The recruits froze, their mouths agape, their earlier mockery replaced with a chilling realization. This was not a test, this was a reckoning. The commander held his salute for a long, silent moment, his gaze fixed on her. The silence was deafening, the weight of the moment pressing down on every single person. The recruits stood in stunned silence, their earlier laughter now a distant, shameful echo. Anya, for the first time, allowed a flicker of emotion to cross her face. A single tear, hot and heavy, rolled down her cheek, but her gaze remained steady. Finally, the commander lowered his hand and spoke, his voice carrying the weight of 100 battles. "Recruit," he said, his eyes filled with a deep, abiding respect. "That tattoo. It's the same one that my best friend, my battle buddy, carried into every mission. The same one he died to protect." He looked at her, and a hint of a smile touched his lips. "He used to tell me, the bravest battles are the ones fought in silence. It seems you understand that better than any of us." The burly recruit, his face pale with shame, took a tentative step forward. "Sir, I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. The commander didn't acknowledge him. He simply looked at Anya, a silent understanding passing between them. The commander finally addressed the stunned recruits. "You see, a person's strength isn't measured by their size or how loud they can talk. It's measured by what they carry in their heart. This recruit, with her quiet dignity, has more courage in her little finger than all of you put together. She carries a heavier burden than you could ever imagine, and she does it with grace. You laughed at her tattoo, but you didn't know what it meant. You didn't know you were mocking a hero." A profound silence settled over the group. There were no more jokes, no more jeers, only a deep, abiding respect. The recruits looked at Anya not with contempt, but with awe. They had seen her silence as weakness, but it was, in fact, her greatest strength. They had laughed at her tattoo, not knowing they were laughing at the memory of a fallen hero, a man who had fought a silent battle and inspired a new one. The commander turned and walked away, leaving the recruits to their shame and their newfound respect for the woman who had stood tall when they had all fallen. They now understood that the bravest among them were not the loudest, but the ones who carried their silent battles with unwavering grace. They had laughed at a hero, and in the end, it was their own arrogance that had been exposed. The training ground, once a place of mockery and contempt, had become a sacred space, a silent testament to a woman who had taught them all the true meaning of honor. We often judge people by what we see on the surface, their size, their appearance, a simple tattoo. But true honor is often hidden from view, carried in silence and revealed only in the moments when it matters most. It is in the quiet acts of courage, the small gestures of defiance, and the unwavering resolve of a silent hero that we find the true meaning of strength. Where are you watching from? Share your thoughts on this story in the comments, and subscribe for more stories that honor true silent heroes.